we go. And I will say for the person that asked us to pray, we did pray. So sorry, we just got turned on. This is a very somber, serious scripture. Scripture we're going to be looking at today. There's just, it's just scary when we look at God's judgment. And so that's where we're going. I will back up and hit just real quickly chapter 18 because it sets the stage, and we're looking at Sodom and Gomorrah, and so that's going to be where the diving into. But I want to talk about the word purged. Now, we purge closets. How many of you ever purged your closet?
Never, not even a single time. That's why I can't get in the door.
You're being sarcastic? Are you?
I'm being a little bit sarcastic,
Okay.
but I can barely get in the door of my closet because I don't purge it frequently enough.
We call it in our house cull. I don't know why we started calling it cull, but new season comes and Fred will say, we need to cull our closets. Somehow I was reading yesterday, it popped up in a feed that said this lady had this method of how she culled or purged her closets. If she could not visualize an article that she maybe could wear in 3 different ways and 3 different combinations, she'd get rid of it. Now, I thought that was it didn't apply to like wedding dresses or evening gowns or stuff like that or special things. I thought that was a little drastic, to be honest with you. But anyway, so purge is also used at other times, and this was the night of the long knives in World War II. And it's when Hitler had hundreds of allies killed to solidify his grasp on Germany. And I won't go into just as by June 1934, Adolf Hitler nearly had total control over Germany. Nonetheless, he was in constant fear that he might be ousted from his position. Hitler decided in order to protect himself, he must do away with all threats. Thus, from June 30 to July 2nd, 1934, which the Chancellor later called the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler purged any and all opposition in his way to a dictatorship. So, a use of the word purged. Now this, golly bum, you want to talk about, I don't know why I picked it. I'm not going to read that, but a intestinal purge. And they have all these odd combinations of drinks that's supposed to just...
Well, when you look at the combination of drinks, you can see why.
Yeah, you can look at that. Let's... How to clean your stomach and intestines naturally. 3 colon cleanse recipes. I would rather have a recipe for yeast rolls than something like that. But purge is a word that we use in our vocabulary. Much more benign than when we look at Sodom and Gomorrah. Because for us, we're purging or culling the clothes closet. So anyway, I thought it might be interesting to see in the past, well, even today, stomach cleanse. Why? Never mind. Let's move on to Bible study. Why? But here we go. I wanted to point out where they think Sodom and Gomorrah was. It has never been truly identified in archaeological digs, okay? But I'm going to make this map. Well, my screen's not going to let me. Huh. What is that? Plus, and I never do it this way.
Control plus.
Control plus?
No.
No, because it's a...
It's a presentation.
Yeah, it's a presentation map. It's not going. Down here at the bottom of the Dead Sea is, and they've got a little question mark by it, is Sodom. That's where they kind of think, maybe sort of, but if you notice, that is down in the desert of this area. It's, it's Israel now, it's probably Saudi Arabia, maybe off in my geography. Yeah, no, I'm not. Egypt's over here to the left of this screen. So because it is total nothing grows there. And then even when you think about it, what is the Dead Sea made
Salt
of?
water,
Water
Sand.
and
salt.
salt. If you can't float anywhere else, you can float in the Dead Sea. Now, I'm doing a real quick run through of chapter 18. In the book is chapter 19, but I want to hit this to give you, because there is promise at the beginning of 18, and then judgment begins to start the process in 19. So, the three visitors, God and two angels appeared to Abraham about midday. That's in verses 1 and 2. There's a word called theophany, Theophany, which is it's like an appearing of God, and anybody can kind of correct, that's not exactly in human form. There is a Christophany, appearance in Christ, more in human form, before Christ came and was completely in human form. So a couple of things I read said, maybe theophany, appearance of God, maybe a pre-incarnate Christ. Not to get into details. Okay. Abraham, and his name is Abraham by now, remember? He asked them, could I feed you as honored guest? And they gave permission. And when I was reading about all he did, he really produced a meal that was for honored guest. Now, one of them confirms this time of the year, Sarah's going to have a son, verse 10. Also part of verse 10, Sarah laughed. And in essence, she said, we are old and worn out. How can we have a son? Now, and this is one of the things, this is a verse in verse 14, a little portion of that verse that I have heard quoted, I don't know how many years, where God says, is anything too hard for the Lord? There's even an old song, not going to sing it, but that's part of the verse of it. Is anything too hard for God? That's where that comes from. Now, excuse me. Now it says, I'm sorry. In verse 22 here, no, I'm sorry. In verse 20, he says, then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. This is in his conversation with Abraham. So the sin and that the outcry of SG is grievous. So God sends the other two to investigate. So that's verse 16 through 21. Now, God knows the sin is horrible. He doesn't have to go send anybody to investigate. He already has that answer. But it is very interesting how he presents this to Abraham. So this is Abraham begins. Now, who does Abraham know lives in Sodom and Gomorrah? Lot. And Lot's relationship to Abraham is his
Nephew?
He's his nephew. Yeah. And remember, he was the one when God called Abram to leave and begin the long journey to the promised land. Lot just kind of came along. And so one of the things I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we looked at that was he invited? Or he just decided, let me just go and see what happens. So Abraham starts this, and it sounds like maybe bargaining. And I want to read how the numbers, he phrases it a little bit differently every time he asks. So he starts with 50. If there are 50 righteous. Well, if they're 45, okay, God says, no. And then said, well, let me ask. It's fascinating. Y'all go back and read how he phrases it each time. And finally, when he gets to 10, he says, this will be the last time I'm going to ask. Because how many are left when you get right down to it? And so, was Abraham bargaining with God? I don't have an answer for
I
this.
think he was in a sense.
Or
Yeah.
was it the request of a fervent prayer where he was praying? Yeah, I had never thought about that. I just thought he was bargaining. Was he praying that for God's hand to change his level of destruction?
I always saw it as bargaining and as a special aspect of Abraham's status that God would deign to bargain with him, just like he did with Moses. You know,
Right.
There was some bargaining with Moses as well, and I kind of thought that was cool. Here's someone who would dare to bargain with God.
Right. Any thoughts on that question? Was it bargaining, or was it an opportunity to Abram ask fervently of God?
I think there's a traditional recoil to say bargaining with God, because I would hazard to guess everybody has.
Bargains, God, if you
You've been,
will.
You've been in a pit of despair, and you did it.
Sure,
Guaranteed. I have done it.
I have done. Yeah.
I think that, so bargaining, I guess,
Begging?
it's more like begging, because
Okay.
you're not like offering something else. You're usually not offering anything of worth in return. You usually say, please don't, please don't, please don't, please don't. Not, most of the time it's not, I'll go to church for every Sunday for the rest of my life.
That's a good question. What was Abraham bargaining? You're offering something in turn, right? You're going.
He has
somebody's
nothing
going,
to-
He's
He has nothing to offer
I'll
in
sell you
return.
this for 40 grand. You go, how about 35?
Yeah.
And he's not offering anything in return. I didn't really think of that.
My old pastor said that he was giving a testimony one day, and he said that he got on an airplane, and he wasn't saved at the time, and he got on the airplane, and it was having a real rough flight, and he said, Lord, he said, if you'll get me through this, he said, I promise I'll do whatever you want me to do.
And
did,
evidently
and
he
he
did.
did.
He did, yeah.
So
It's
that was kind of bargaining with God.
and in the sense that he was going to give something, he was giving his life back. Now it'd be fascinating how many people tried to make a bargain and never followed through with what they offered up. But yeah, just something to mull over. Was it bargaining with God? Was it begging God? Or was it a prayer of a man who knew that God's hand could be moved?
All the above.
All the above. Okay.
I'm sure many others have thought the same thing, but I always wondered in this sequence, and did you find this many righteous, this many righteous? He's not considering the children who are not old enough to decide if it's righteous or not. How many children live there? How
Right.
many innocent people who never are not old enough to have done anything bad?
There
live
were innocent people in Sodom and Gomorrah. There were children. But
But they didn't count in the bargain.
they didn't count in the bargaining. There were other people that didn't count. I'll leave it at that for the time being. Okay, now, we're now in chapter 19, and that's what we're going to look at. Kind of watch the timeline, because this is going to start us in evening. By the time we finish all of this, there's going to be approximately 24 hours will have elapsed. So 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city, which was not unusual, for sometimes influential people would sit, beggars too, and influential people would sit in the gateway. Remember the story with Ruth and Boaz, and Boaz went to kind of sat down at the gateway because he wanted to make an arrangement for Ruth to become his wife. So Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city, okay, When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. Now, he addressed them as my lords. And one thing said, the word he used for Lord did not mean the same as how Abraham addressed the visitors. Not that he wasn't disrespectful to them, but there was a different understanding of Abraham, I think, had a heart that realized who he was standing before. Okay, now, my lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet, spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning. So I'm being a good host. Now, what is there is an obligation in that culture. If you bring somebody under your roof, what are you offering them?
Safety.
Safety. You're offering them protection. Okay? So, no, they answered. We'll spend the night in the square. Yeah, there are no surprise. Please, as you keep this in these two visitors knew exactly what was going to happen. Okay?
So did Lot.
So did Lot. That's why, a good point, Josh. Because that's why not Josh said, that's, sorry. That's why Lot said this. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He knew what would happen to these two men. The sin, remember in that other verse, the outcry was so great from Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? He prepared a meal for them, breaking bread without yeast, and they ate. So we've had supper. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. That's total depravity. Absolutely total depravity. And homosexuality was not an unusual thing in that whole culture of that, not just here, but in, I don't want to really at this time call it Middle Eastern, because that whole area can't be described as Middle Eastern, but some of the ancient records, it was not something new under the sun. So they called Lot. Where are the men that came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Now, those men, let's assume they were average man. They were not an appearance of God or a pre-incarnate Christ. They were just regular. If he had sent those men out, they would have probably not survived that night. Very likely. Okay. So, let them out of your house. I want them here. We want them outside because we know exactly, and Lot knew exactly. So I tell you, homosexuality must have been absolutely rampant in that city and that the culture there. Now, of everything that happens, this next part is what bothers me the worst. Okay. So Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them, but don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." Now, one commentary said he was just trying to maybe guilt the people. This is kind of an exaggeration. Hey, I'll give you this is so bad, I'd give you my daughters for you to go away and not do this. I maybe so, but I believe this is what Lot had in mind. Now, unmarried, a little bit later, it's going to come up. It's going to mention his Lot's two son-in-laws. So one of two things: he had more daughters, two more daughters that were married, or these two daughters, they had the kind of the formal arrangement to marry, but it hadn't happened yet. So I mean, either one kind of makes sense. If we want to look at how daughters and children are perceived in that culture, there you go. I'll sacrifice my daughters. And again, the daughters probably would not have survived that night either. So it's more than saying, okay, you can go have sex with my daughters. In essence, it's saying, I'm going to give you permission if my daughters don't survive what you're going to do. Oh well, that's an evil to me almost worse than the evil of what the men of Sodom and Gomorrah were going to do. Now maybe because I'm a woman, and
Oh, I think it's appalling, and there's several different places. You know, just because there's a story of somebody who's famous in the Old Testament, it doesn't mean that the example of what they did is held up as an example for us to go and do likewise. So, you know, it's easy
Right.
to forget that sometimes, but you know, it's appalling that Lot would suggest that. There's another story in the Old Testament about a different prophet, and some people came to the door of that, and he gave them his wife, and they raped her to death.
It's
And
in Judges. It's a parallel to this story because it's not about sex at all. It's about power, domination, and violence, and even in the further on in the Old Testament, Isaiah says the sin of Sodom is oppressing marginalized groups, murder and theft. Jeremiah says it's adultery, idolatry, and power abuses. Amos and Zephaniah say it's pride
yeah,
and
they're
mocking
all
behavior.
giving their thought on Sodom.
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
I
no, God, through His prophets,
It's giving, yeah,
is giving. So we get wrapped up around kind of that, but it was
You're saying it was more than
it was
sex.
a sin of not providing hospitality that it is. I think we get caught up because it's flashy to talk. I think to talk about it as with this one particular thing, but there is so much sin wrapped up in what went down in Sodom and Gomorrah that to say it's this one thing, I'm like, no, I mean,
No,
Lot
no.
was already so inoculated in the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah that he felt it was appropriate to offer his daughters as a sacrifice.
good point.
And he's part of the leadership culture. He's sitting in the
He's
front
sitting at
gate.
the
It's
gate.
probably his turn to sit in the front gate. You know,
Which we get to in the, where is it? That next, you come as a foreigner and now you want to play the judge,
How dare you?
right?
Yeah, yeah.
He was a part of the group.
you kind of get an image of Sodom as a murder capital. Any travelers come through that, you know, in a culture that really reveres hospitality, any nice looking travelers come through, we want to kill them and take their stuff and rape them or whatever. Let's do it.
Yeah, no honoring of human life from any stretch of the imagination. So, and then that ties right into the next thing. Get out of our way. Now he's outside with them, remember? Get out of our way, they replied. This fellow, can't you see the group talking to each other? This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. And again, because he was sitting at the gate, he had gained some, not if maybe authority might be a little bit too strong, but they knew him. We'll treat you worse than them. So Lot, you're going to be in the same boat with what's going to happen. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. Lot is standing in front of the door. But the men inside, the two visitors, reached out and pulled Lot back in the house and shut the door. Okay? Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so that they could not find the door. I believe God's plan, they had to be there were too many people there that the house could have been broken into. But God's plan in his hands said, no, this is not what's going to happen.
I also want to point out that the strength of, I'm going to call them angels, because you had multiple men pushing at the door, and they just reached out and pulled Lot in
Right.
against that.
And just stopped it.
And also the terrible hearts of the people that were outside, because they pushed through being struck by blindness. You would think that after somebody realizes for a second there that they've been struck blind, that they would go, did anybody else just lose their sight?
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. They kept pushing.
I hadn't even thought about that one. That, why did they not ask each other? If we in here for some reason all lost our sight immediately,
Somebody would say something.
somebody would say something.
Did anybody else just have that happen?
Yeah, you see what I don't see?
But so obsessed with what they want to happen. And think about it. This was not have been a large house. They ought to have been able to find the door. But they couldn't find the door. You know, God takes care of every eventuality. When man plans, if it's not in God's plan, it doesn't matter how much we plan. Now, here, God's mercy to Lot. This is going to address the son-in-law question. The two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, son-in-laws, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters, and he said, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought they were joking. He was joking. Now, it's interesting how he expands that to, do you have any other family or anybody who belongs to you? So that could have been servants, that could have been slaves, anybody. So God offers a bigger crew that you can come. Excuse me. Do you think there might be more than 10 people in that group right there? Just thinking. He's very, excuse me, he's very clear. It's going to be destroyed. It's not going to be inconvenience the city. It's not going to be a little bit. It's total destruction. And again, that same word, outcry, that was the same word that was used when they were having the conversation with Abraham. The city is shouting to the heavens the anguish of those suffering injustice. So, to have reached the ears of God, or the depravity of it reaching the ears of God. This is interesting. Lot's son-in-laws, do you realize he has no real moral authority with his son-in-laws? They thought he was joking.
I don't think he had any moral integrity with anybody.
He certainly didn't have leadership with those, the group outside there. And wouldn't his son-in-laws have seen, I don't know if they experienced the blindness, but surely they would have seen, okay, now,
The son-in-law, yeah, I wouldn't think so. I thought the son-in-laws were in the house.
okay, could be in the house, or maybe not all the men, this is just conjecture. Did all the men in the city become blind, or was it just the men who were trying to surround Lot's house?
All
What
of the
does
men
it
of the city, young and old, were at the front door.
Okay, then that answers the question for me. Thank you, Josh. So, then they must have been inside the house. But the no moral authority. And in that culture, who had more authority? The older person, the older in the family, or the younger? The older. Think of the parable of the prodigal son. You know, He had to ask his daddy before he could get what he wanted. He couldn't just take it. So now, with the coming of the dawn. So here we go. It's all this is taking place overnight. Okay. The angels urge Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away." The sense of the word is total destruction when the city is punished. Now, when he hesitated, okay, I'm going to skip to the next slide because I'm going back to Genesis 13 to talk about why Lot may have hesitated. 13, 10 through 3. Y'all, this be familiar. Lot looked around. This was when there was a little issue with his uncle Abraham. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar, and that Zoar is going to be, that actually means small city. It's going to come back up in this. Was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The 2 men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plains and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. When Lot chose to do, those people didn't just suddenly start sinning after Lot arrived. Lot knew what they were like, and he still went. Now, what was the draw of this area around Sodom for Lot?
Very fertile.
It's fertile. You know, one of the things with Abram at that time and Lot, the conflict between where the sheep, you know, maybe the sheep were having to share pasture land, and so that's when Abram said, you know, we got to divide you, and you get to choose. So he chose a wicked area, and he chose because he wanted the wealth of the area. He was probably already wealthy. Abraham was certainly already wealthy. Pardon?
Lot was greedy.
Lot was greedy. Now, we talk about moral authority, greed. Okay, now let's go back and read what was in 19. When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city. We don't know why he hesitated. He could have been scared. If we notice as we read on down, a lot of it appears the motivation for Lot is just fear. And this is supposition, but maybe the motivation for him hesitating is, I've chosen all this stuff. What if I stay here? Will it really happen? I don't know. But when he chose to divide, when Abram agreed to split the land, he knowingly chose where he was going to live.
I don't think we have to defend Lot. I think it's perfectly fine to say he didn't want to leave because he liked it.
Yeah.
All his stuff.
He hasn't shown anything to anybody through anything that's happened here that he is a great upstanding moral person.
The real question is, why was the Lord merciful to him?
Why was the Lord?
Why did God save him?
Because of Abraham.
Because of Abraham.
That's the only reason. I mean,
Just in honor of Abraham.
Yeah.
We're going to save your.
And Abraham was of the promise.
We're going to save your sorry excuse for a nephew, just because he's related to you.
Okay? So they couldn't have gotten out of the city without the men taking them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, okay, now listen to this. Flee for your lives. Command. Number 2, don't look back. And number 3, don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. Is this clear? So if God gives a command, should we think that God's going to give you whatever you need to be obedient? Look what Lot says. But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes." Well, that's an assumption. Because when, as Josh says, God's responding to this request because of Abram, nothing to do with Lot. "And you've shown great kindness to me in sparing my life, but I can't flee to the mountains." And the feeling is, I don't have enough strength or energy. I can't make it that far. This disaster will overtake me and I'll die. Now, what could he have asked them for? I don't like the plan. I want to change the plan. But instead, he could have said, "I don't know if I can make it. Can you bless me and give us strength to get there?" And a huge lack of faith, because if these men are getting them out of the city, then why couldn't he believe that God was going to be faithful and protect them? But he sure didn't do it. He's bargaining with God, or bargaining with these two. "This disaster will overtake me and I'll die. I'm getting you out of the city so you won't die." Why don't you believe it? Here's my solution. "Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. What small had to do with it, I don't have a clue. But Zoar means little city, little town. And remember, it was mentioned in chapter 13 when Lot said, Lot looked over the plain towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and Zoar was in that verse there. "Let me flee to it. It's very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared."
Thank you.
That's mind-boggling to me. I'm not saying we wouldn't have done the same thing, but just get me there. It'll be okay. I put a comment there. Argued with the men, pleaded. He didn't trust God to get him where God wanted him. You can let me have you can spare destruction on a small city, because in the whole scheme of things, does that small city really count? So, just let me hide out, and you're gonna do in Sodom and Gomorrah. You don't need to do in Zoar. So he's telling God what he needs to do. So there is, when Josh says, he had no moral authority or righteousness, it's wrapped around all this stuff that he's doing. It's not just, and Thea, you made a good point, not just his daughters. He said to them, the two, "Very well, I will grant this request too." And can't you hear him saying, "Too"? Okay. "I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly. Don't hesitate, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." And then the little comment in scripture. That's why the town was called Zoar, which means small. Okay. So please be obedient and hurry. God's hand is waiting until you get there. God's hand certainly didn't have to wait. God could have done whatever he wanted to. But God answered the request that Lot made. And I wish somewhere along the way somebody said to Lot, "This is happening because Abraham made a request of God." They may have. No. So now, By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Now remember when the three encountered Abraham, it was midday. Okay, so now we're about midday. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. There was about 3 theories as to how God could have done that using the geology of the land. There was one of them that stuck in my head was there were a lot of tar pits, and God could have set those on fire. From my perspective, it was interesting to read. From my perspective, it doesn't really matter other than it was just interesting, because it says he rained down burning sulfur from heaven. That works. Everything, the destruction and the fire was total. We're finishing up a thing on geology for Eli's science, and one of the things we were looking at is the structure of volcanoes. And I went up and pulled St. Helens and Mount St. Helens, Oregon, Washington, and looked at that. There were, of course, videos before it erupted. We were looking at the scientists were expecting it and all that. Then we started looking at how it erupted. There was no true lava. I had never thought about that one. That came out of Mount St. Helens. It was all this pyroclastic, all this stuff, and you could see the rolls of. If you want to see destruction that reminded me of this, go look at some of that video, and then the video afterwards where the land was just absolutely laid waste from it. Now, destruction came from God. It was not an accident. And remember, when Lot arrived, it was green and fertile. Now, no vegetation. Talk about complete judgment. There's the picture of God's complete judgment on that land.
One of my favorite things about this particular passage is and why I think that this is the pre-incarnate Christ, is when it says the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. They're using Yahweh there.
Okay.
So Yahweh rained fire. Jesus was. Then Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from Yahweh out of heaven.
Okay. Yeah, it came down.
Mm-hmm. But there's 2 Yahwehs here.
Okay, say that again.
Then Yahweh rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from Yahweh out of heaven.
Okay, so Lord and Lord are Yahweh.
Yes.
Okay, got it. So then that would be a theophany, appearance of God.
Pre-incarnate Christ.
Yeah, pre-incarnate Christ there. Lot's wife looked back. She was told not to look back. Remember? Don't do that. Don't look back. Why'd she look back? Why do you think she looked back?
And see what happened.
To see what happened.
Missing her city.
Where do you think, where did Lot's wife could have come from?
That area.
Sodom and Gomorrah. We don't know how long Lot lived in the land, over the land he chose before this all happened. It could have been her city. It could have been she's got family who are going to be destroyed. But she was told not to. Look back. So now, if you want to read, you think the daughters haven't learned anything? This was not in the scripture that was in there to study, but they lived in Zoar for a short period of time, and then Lot took them. So the city wasn't destroyed. Lot took them, and if you remember when you may have read that, where did he take them to?
Mountain.
Took them to a cave in the mountains, and the daughters were concerned. What was their worry?
They didn't have any man to give them an offspring.
Yeah, they didn't have any man to give them an offspring, because who I might have thought, they all got destroyed. So those two daughters, we think about what was the morality of Lot. If you want to see if they passed that morality down, they got their daddy drunk, and then they went in, individually and had sex with their drunk daddy. They chose to commit incest. People think there's things that are new under the sun today. Absolutely not. And so they each got pregnant, and those, I think the children became, one became the Moabites, and the other became the Ammonites. And those were tribes that were, when the Israelites came back to the promised land, those were two tribes that they fought. Lack of moral authority. They knew that was wrong. They absolutely knew it was wrong. And there were people in Zoar. Remember, God didn't destroy that. So that was their fix.
I've always seen that story of the daughters going in to Lot as an overly euphemistically kind presentation of Lot because he was the father of the group. I've always assumed that was the kind way it was presented, but really Lot raped his daughters. That's how I always have seen it. It's like
it wouldn't have been the first time in that culture either. And in the Bible, it wouldn't have been the first time. So if that is true from that perspective, then Lot's moral authority is, how much you can't get any lower, I would think, than that. So, what can we learn from the story of Lot?
A lot.
A lot.
Don't get drunk.
Huh?
Don't get drunk.
Don't get drunk. What else? I'm gonna remember that a lot.
And it was in stereo too, I think.
It was-
You
yeah, it
said
was
the
in
exact
stereo.
same thing I said.
Well, what is some of a lot that we can learn from this? There's a ton in there.
I think you learn there's some value to being friends with people who love God.
Okay.
Lot was related to Abraham. Lot got his cookies literally pulled out of the fire because of who he was related to, not because he was any good. He was a little bit good. He did sit in the front of the city, and he tried to these people, okay, come stay in my house. You can leave early in the morning, and nobody will ever know you're there, and you'll be fine. So he did have. He wasn't quite totally as depraved as everybody else in the city, but still, there's some value to being friends with people of God, I guess.
And then the flip side of that is the value, the impact that people of God can have on other people who are not believers. So both ways.
It's clearly God's looking more kindly on Lot than he deserves, just
Right.
because he's doing it for Abraham's sake. So think of that when you pray for somebody that you love that's not close to God. God may take extra pity on them or extra mercy on them because you ask.
We wouldn't have a clue how God's hand, from our eyes, how God's hand is working over that other person's life. Josh, you were,
The scripture says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is Yahweh."
yeah.
There's when the majority of and you just look back at Israel. There's lots of prosperity. There's lots of good things, and good on earth things. People are good, crops are good, all of this stuff. It all follows, always follows.
When people acknowledge God as Lord,
When-
that's
And the majority of the nation.
right, right. So the nation could be considered for the most part.
Because the other
Right.
thing I think you can see from this is, we got tied up early on when we were looking at the individuals. We talked about, we were kind of taking an individualistic look, because we talked about, the children and all being consumed in this as well. But God looked at the nation. God looked at the city.
Well, in Israel, if we went on when we were looking like in Jeremiah and those, God's judgment affected innocent people too,
Mhm.
innocent children.
And God looked at Lot's family when he was rescuing them. He looked at the family too. It was that group.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do, just like with us, it had absolutely nothing to do with anything that was in their hearts.
Well, that's true because we pretty much. And now I was looking for the. There, I gotta tell y'all, I don't know if you ever use BibleGateway.com because you can look at all kinds of translations, and so I saw yesterday, I thought, because I'll have multiple books out for $4.99 or $4.17 a month for a year. You get all these Bible study helps, like all kinds of commentaries, and it will even. So I was on Genesis 19, and I had all these different commentaries, and I could click. It already found in the commentary at Genesis 19, and so it was really interesting, and it had maps and all. Well worth for the year $4.19 a month. But yeah, a global look. But now this was where I was going, Josh. In the New Testament, and I don't know if it was Paul, but somebody referred back to Lot as being righteous. Now,
But you're looking at what he has done. What makes us righteous?
no, I'm looking at the writer in the New Testament
Mhm.
in his list.
Yeah, he said he was righteous.
Said he
What
was
makes
righteous.
what makes you righteous?
When God says you're righteous.
But it's not what you've done.
Okay. So what
And I'm
you're
saying that's the case for Lot here.
God
It's-
determined,
we-
right?
We're not, and that's why I don't think we have to defend Lot, just like we don't have to defend David for what David did,
Okay.
because none of us are any better.
No, that's no. None of us. Our righteousness is as filthy rags. It's the righteousness of God that
Right.
clothes us. Anything else we can learn from Lot? Pick good neighbors.
When God says run away, run away.
Well, exactly.
When
yeah.
God says
Yeah.
run.
Yeah.
And then
It's either your town's gonna get blowed up or you're gonna end up in the belly of a fish. Either way, I would do what he says.
I'd take a hard pass on both. if I could.
Yeah. Be obedient to what God said, but then believe He's going to provide what you need when you can't even visualize. However, is it going to happen?
It matters the company you keep. Why hadn't Lot moved away long before? Why was he still there?
And
He shouldn't have been still there.
No.
He should have left.
Yeah,
It's because he liked it.
he liked it.
Because he probably walked in with a ton of wealth and was immediately placed into a position of power,
That might
Which
explain
is-
why he was at the gate.
which is why he was at the gate most likely. And then, I kind of wonder if the reason that, part of the reason maybe he was afraid to go into the mountains, I wonder if he was afraid of what Abraham might do to him. Like, for some reason the mountains were unsafe to Lot. And I wonder if it was like, man, my uncle is going to look at me and realize that I am just an absolute ding dong and have messed things up. And so I don't want to go there. It's not safe. So I'll go to Zoar because it's a city and I'm safe in cities because I've always been safe in city because I bring my power and my wealth with me. But he got roused.
His wealth is gone.
But
now.
his fear came back.
Mhm.
even that's why I left Zoar, because he became afraid of the people there. But I bet the people knew who he was from Sodom and Gomorrah too. And so
A
I
man
bet,
of repute. I mean, of
yeah, he
wealth.
had a reputation. He had money.
But maybe, like you were saying, maybe it was because I don't know where did Abraham's where did he go off to? That wasn't the mountains, was
He
it?
went off toward Canaan.
Okay.
So Abraham went west, and Lot went kind of south. He went south toward. I'll have to look
So there's
up.
mountains on either side.
When you-
Well, that's true.
Well, when you said that, I had wondered because the original conflict was amongst the herdsmen, and I can't help but wonder if maybe the other herdsmen would have been
In
where
the
that was
mountains?
at. Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to find, but he looked and saw the plain. This was before. So the two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived along the cities of the plain and pitched his tent near Sodom. There were actually about 5 cities of the plain that were known at that time. People of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. But I'm gonna disconnect streaming. Bye, y'all.